History is often written as a series of inevitable conclusions, but in the year 224 AD, the world felt anything but certain. For nearly 5 centuries, the Roman Empire had looked to its eastern frontier and seen a mirror image of its own imperial ambitions. This was the realm of the Parthians, the Arsacids, a dynasty that had survived the legions of Crassus, the brilliance of Trajan, and the fury of Marcus Aurelius. But empires do not always fall to foreign invaders. Sometimes they rot from within, leaving a hollow shell that waits for a single, decisive blow to shatter. But here is the part most historians debate. Was the fall of the Parthians a result of Roman pressure, or was it a calculated coup by a man who believed he was destined by the gods to restore a lost world? As the sun set on the Arsacid dynasty, a new fire was being stoked in the southern province of Pars. A man named Ardashir, a minor king of a minor city, was about to do the unthinkable. He would not just challenge the Parthian king of kings. He would challenge the very idea of Rome. This is the story of the first great clash between the Sasanian Empire and the Roman world, a conflict that would redefine the borders of the Middle East for half a millennium. To understand the fury of Ardashir, we must first understand the world he intended to destroy. The Parthian Empire was a sprawling, decentralized patchwork of feudal lords and vassal kings. At its height, it was a superpower of the Silk Road, controlling the flow of wealth between China and the Mediterranean. Historians typically divide the Parthian era into 4 distinct phases. The first, beginning in 247 BC, was a period of humble origins, a small kingdom in the northeastern reaches of Iran, struggling for survival. By the second period, under the iron-fisted rule of Mithridates I and II, the Parthians had transformed into an imperial juggernaut, crushing the remnants of the Seleucid Greeks and establishing themselves as the undisputed masters of Western Asia. The third period, beginning around 70 BC, was the era of the Great Standoff. This was the time of the Battle of Carrhae, where Roman hubris was met with the lethal efficiency of the Parthian horse archer. Yet, beneath the surface of these military triumphs, a cancer was growing. But this moment changed everything. Following the death of Phraates IV, the empire descended into a cycle of fratricidal civil war. The Arsacid house, once a symbol of unity, became a nest of vipers. This internal decay eroded the military strength of the empire, just as a new set of threats appeared on the horizon. By the fourth and final period, the empire was a shadow of its former self. Even the reign of Vologases I, one of the dynasty's most capable leaders, could only delay the inevitable. Vologases was a man who understood that an empire needs a soul. He fought the rising Kushan Empire in the east, suppressed internal usurpers like Vardanes, and successfully installed his brother, Tiridates, on the throne of Armenia. This was Vologases' greatest legacy. By placing an Arsacid on the Armenian throne, he created a branch of the family that would outlive the Persian Empire itself, reigning until the 5th century. But while he secured the borders, the heart of the empire was failing. Vologases turned toward culture, ordering the collection of the Avesta, the sacred Zoroastrian texts. He was trying to build a national identity, but he was running out of time. After the death of Vologases, the floodgates opened. The Roman Empire, sensing weakness, abandoned decades of cautious diplomacy. Under the Emperor Trajan, Roman legions crossed the Euphrates with a singular goal: the total subjugation of Mesopotamia. For the first time in history, Ctesiphon, the jewel of the East, fell to Roman hands. The psychological impact was devastating. Though the Romans were eventually forced to withdraw, the loss of prestige was permanent. The cities of Nisibis and Edessa, vital gateway hubs, were ripped away from Parthian control. To the noble houses of the East, the Arsacids no longer looked like divinely chosen protectors. They looked like failures. The situation grew even more dire as the Kushan Empire seized the wealthy trading cities of Herat and Merv. The Parthian treasury was shrinking, and with it, the loyalty of the aristocracy. By 161 AD, the Parthians were so desperate to regain their standing that they took a gamble. They became the aggressors, initiating a new war with Rome. What happened next was never recorded in the victory orations of the kings, at least not the full truth. Vologases IV initially saw success, executing Roman governors and reclaiming territory. But nature proved to be a more formidable foe than the legions. A plague, likely smallpox, devastated the Parthian army. When the Romans counterattacked in 165 AD, they didn't just win. They'd plundered Ctesiphon to its foundations. The cycle of humiliation continued. In 193 AD, Vologases V attempted to spark uprisings in Roman-held Edessa, only to be met by the iron will of Emperor Septimius Severus. Severus didn't just push the Parthians back. He seized Ctesiphon for a third time. Narrator, imagine the state of the Parthian psyche. 3 times their capital had been violated. Their gods seemed to have deserted them. Their kings were paying indemnities to Rome just to survive. Into this vacuum of leadership stepped the most dangerous man in the ancient world. While the Arsacids were bleeding out on the Roman frontier, the province of Pars, the ancestral heartland of the ancient Achaemenids, was quiet. It was here that Ardashir, a man who claimed descent from the mythical kings of old, began his ascent. He didn't see himself as a rebel. He saw himself as a restorer. To Ardashir, the Parthians were barbarian usurpers who had allowed Persian dignity to be trampled by the West. The final spark was the Roman campaign of 217 AD. The Roman Emperor Caracalla had launched a brutal, senseless invasion, desecrating the royal tombs at Arbela. Though Caracalla was assassinated by his own men, and the Parthian king Artabanus IV managed to secure a technical victory at the Battle of Nisibis, the cost was too high. The Parthian army was a spent force. Here is the part most people overlook. Artabanus was so focused on the Roman indemnity that he failed to see the Persian army marching on his rear. In 224 AD, on the plains of Hormozgan, the two worlds collided. Ardashir did not just defeat Artabanus, he ended him. With the death of the last Parthian king of kings, the Sasanian era began. Ardashir moved with a speed that shocked the ancient world. He reclaimed the eastern territories from the Kushians, and then turned his gaze toward the ultimate prize, the Roman Empire. Ardashir was not interested in the live and let live diplomacy of the later Parthians. He sent a message to Rome that was as clear as it was terrifying. He claimed that the entire Near East, from the Euphrates to the Aegean Sea, was Persian by right of inheritance. He was demanding that Rome retreat to Europe. In 230 AD, the new Persia made its move. Ardashir marched into northern Mesopotamia, sweeping aside Roman garrisons that had stood for generations. The Roman governors sent frantic dispatches to the young Emperor Alexander Severus. Alexander was a man of the Mediterranean, a student of philosophy who preferred the court to the camp. He attempted to use the old Roman playbook, condescension. He sent an envoy to Ardashir, telling him to be content with his own borders, and reminding him that the Persians were not fighting barbarian kinsmen anymore, but the might of Rome. Ardashir's response was a masterclass in psychological warfare. He didn't just send a letter back. He selected 400 of his most elite warriorsmen of immense stature, draped in gold and riding the finest armored horses the world had ever seen. They rode into the Roman camp not as diplomats, but as a warning. They delivered a demand for the total evacuation of Asia. Alexander Severus was shaken. He realized that the time for letters had passed. He began a massive mobilization, draining the Rhine and Danube frontiers to bolster the east. He distributed gold to his soldiers, performed the sacred rituals in the Senate, and marched for Antioch. But to understand this next move, we must go back deeper into the Roman strategy. Alexander was not a warrior, but his generals were. They devised a three-pronged invasion meant to overwhelm the Sasanian numbers. One column would strike through Armenia into Media. A second would march through the southern marshes. The third, led by the emperor himself, would drive straight for Ctesiphon. It was a plan that should have worked. On paper, it was perfect. But Ardashir was not fighting a paper war. In the summer of 232 AD, the Roman machinery of war began to grind forward. The northern column saw initial success, plundering the villages of Media. Ardashir sent a light force to harass them, but he was waiting for the bigger prize. His spies, who were far more effective than the Roman scouts, reported a fatal flaw in the Roman advance. The southern column had moved too quickly, losing contact with Alexander's central force. The three heads of the Roman Hydra were no longer talking to each other. Ardashir seized the moment. He ignored the northern and central columns and turned the full, terrifying weight of the Sasanian army against the isolated southern force. The Romans were marching toward Khuzestan, overconfident and out of formation. They believed Ardashir was pinned down in his capital. They were wrong. Suddenly, the horizon erupted in a cloud of dust. Thousands of Sasanian horse archers appeared from the flanks, moving with a fluid grace the Roman infantry couldn't match. They didn't charge, they circled. They began the Cantabrian Circle, a lethal whirlwind of arrows that turned the Roman formation into a pincushion. What happened next was a staggering disaster, one that would not be eclipsed until the fall of the empire itself. As the Roman shields grew heavy with arrows, the heavy cavalry, the Asauran, leveled their long lances. These were the tanks of the ancient world, men and horses clad head to toe in iron scales. They hit the Roman line like a tidal wave. The Roman formation shattered. Hemmed in by the archers and crushed by the lancers, the entire southern column was annihilated. When word reached Alexander Severus, he didn't march to avenge them. He froze. Reports of heatstroke, disease, and the utter destruction of his flank led him to do the one thing a Roman emperor should never do. He ordered a full, panicked retreat. The retreat was a catastrophe. The northern column, still deep in the Armenian mountains, was caught in an early winter. Without supplies or support, thousands of Roman soldiers froze to death or were picked off by Sasanian scouts. By the time Alexander Severus returned to Antioch, his great army was a ghost of its former self. To save his throne, Alexander did what all failing politicians do. He lied. He returned to Rome and declared a magnificent victory. He issued coins showing him trampling the Persians. He even claimed to have captured Persian war elephants, a detail most historians find hilarious. Given that there is no evidence the Sasanians used elephants in that specific campaign, but Ardashir didn't care about Roman propaganda. He had achieved his goal. He had tested the Roman Emperor and found him wanting. He had proven that the Sasanians were the new masters of the East. However, the war had taken its toll on the Persians as well. Ardashir's army was exhausted. Instead of pushing into Syria, he used the peace to consolidate his power. He turned his attention to Armenia, where the last of the Arsacids still held out. According to Armenian tradition, Ardashir couldn't win on the battlefield, so he turned to treachery, orchestrating the assassination of King Khosrov to bring the region under his thumb. By 235 AD, Ardashir was the undisputed king of kings. He had rebuilt the administrative heart of Iran, founded new cities, and created a military elite that would be the envy of the world. Ardashir I died in 242 AD, but he did not die as a mere rebel. He died as the founder of a 400-year legacy. He had replaced a decaying feudal kingdom with a centralized, religiously driven superpower. He taught the Romans a lesson they would never forget. The East was no longer a playground for ambitious Caesars. It was a fortress. The clash between Ardashir and Alexander Severus was the opening chapter in a long, bloody epic. It set the stage for Ardashir's son, Ardashir I, who would go on to achieve what his father only dreamed of, capturing a Roman emperor, Valerian, and using him as a footstool to mount his horse. But that is a story for another time. To understand the world of the 3rd century, one must realize that the crisis of the Roman Empire wasn't just caused by internal rot. It was accelerated by the brilliance and brutality of the Sasanian kings. As we look back through the mists of 17 centuries, the figures of Ardashir and Alexander Severus stand as symbols of two worlds in transition. One was a sunset, the final, gasping breath of the Roman Golden Age. The other was a sunrise, the birth of a Persian Renaissance that would influence everything from Byzantine court ritual to the development of medieval chivalry. Ardashir's fire did more than burn Roman camps. It lit a path for a new identity, one that refused to be a mere footnote in Western history. He reminded the world that while empires may rise and fall like the tides, the spirit of a people once awakened is a force that no legion can truly conquer. History is not just a collection of dates. It is the study of momentum. And in the 3rd century, the momentum shifted east. If you found this deep dive into the Sasanian-Roman Wars insightful, consider joining our community of history enthusiasts. We believe that the stories of the past are the only way to understand the complexities of our present. Hit that subscribe button, tap the bell icon, and let us know in the comments. Do you think Rome could have won if Alexander Severus had been a different kind of leader? Or was the Sasanian rise simply an unstoppable force of nature? Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next chapter of our journey through the annals of time.